Yes, let's talk first about IWWOF, then we will introduce ourselves, and more specifically, we want to introduce, if my presentation works, the IWWOF Talks Business Week series. So we are very excited about this and very happy to announce that this event is not going to be a unique event. We have a fabulous lineup of companies that will be doing events for us. Hopefully every couple of weeks we will have a new Finnish company coming to present, or at least change leaders and thought provokers that are based in Finland and working for companies here. So Microsoft, for instance, is actually an international company, but we'll also have like a lot of Finnish companies. And this is, I think, a really great opportunity for you guys to hear the stories from these guys and to learn about the realities of their business, also their vision for their industry. We want to give you an opportunity to have access to these people also, so that you can ask questions and have a dialogue with them or share your opinions. And as well, we want to give some, let's say, biggest trends around the employment topics. So each webinar will have a different theme, but we'll have a similar structure. So there will be the expert talk, which is the expert presenting on their topic of choice for their company. Then we'll have the speed dating round, which is basically Q&A. You are welcome to put your questions in the chat. We will try to answer as many as possible. And then there will be, like I said, a small section around the employment perspective as well, so the so-called recruitment corner. And my name is Caroline. I'm responsible for the corporate track in IWWOF, and I'm also a change leader at KONE. And I'm very happy to have my co-host today, Galith Nadbornik, who is also part of the IWWOF community and actually the founder of the IWWOF community, and who is a business technology executive and public speaker, and will be my partner in crime today for this first episode. And then very, very thankful for Tuire Sivula to be joining us. Tuire is our guinea pig for this session and has very graciously accepted to be with us today. And she will tell all about her background, the companies she has been working for, and all the experience that she has been having. But for now, at least I can say that Tuire is a senior customer success manager at Microsoft. And well, Tuire, I think it's fair to say that your mission is basically to help your customers succeed in their digital transformation journey, which is very exciting. And we are very happy to have you, like I said, and today you will tell us about change management and the future of work.
Indeed.
So I'm going to stop sharing now, and the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. And I'm assuming that you can hear me okay? So then, yes. All good. Another tip, Caroline, is when you're speaking, then when you have your phone, you can watch what the others are seeing. So I'm going to be looking down from time to time.
So I don't need to be looking like a fool, yes.
No, helpful tips. But yeah, because I realize that there's a delay. So I might, sort of pause when I notice that I'm rushing with my next slide when you guys aren't still there with me yet. So. Okay.
But now I can't see you, but please go ahead. Maybe probably it's just my fault again.
I can see you perfectly fine, Tuire. You are on.
Very good. Then let me get started. So thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so honored to be kicking this off, this series. My name is Tuire Sivula, indeed, and I'm Customer Success Manager with Microsoft. And please do let me know if you want to interrupt me. I think that's we can definitely stop and pause at any point. But today, the topics that I had in mind were indeed to look at change, the way I see it in my work and how we're managing it. I then also wanted to go into the visions of future of work, the way we, from Microsoft point of view, have seen the trends. Then as a third topic, I wanted to also highlight a key component that I've seen being very critical for the above 2 points. And then I wanted to close off with a few words about how Microsoft addresses change and the future of work as a company. I hope this session is going to give you some food for thought and new perspectives, but indeed something that you might even take into your daily lives when you leave this session. All right, but before we get started, as Caroline said, I will share a few words about myself. As a child, I was influenced by 3 very different cultures. You may recognize the Scottish, the Luxembourg, and the German flags here. And I felt very at home when I started off my career with Nokia in project and program management. The international atmosphere, it played out nicely during my spell with Accenture. But it wasn't actually until I moved into consulting, transformation program management consulting with Sophie Gate, that I truly sort of tapped into what I felt was always the dearest and nearest thing to my heart, and that was change management. So the people side of all of these transformations that we had been doing with Nokia as a company. And these now nicely tie into my current position as customer success manager with Microsoft, where, as Caroline said, my main focus is helping our enterprise customers, in my case, they're quite global customers, to manage their digital transformations. They have their objectives and agendas, and I work with the companies to see how we can address the people side of change. On a personal success note, this summer I completed my MBA with Aalto University. I celebrated it by through multiple cycle rides on the seashore of southern Espoo here in Finland. And the apple of my eye, Osku, is never far away from me. He's actually right here sleeping at my feet, so I need to be cautious of not stepping on his tail. Right, but let's get started. So a few words on change. Change is difficult. At least that's what we hear, and let's face it, we feel that although we may be open to new ideas and new circumstances, there might be moments in our lives where we surprise ourselves and we notice that, oh, well, that took me a while to digest. I'm not sure I'm okay with that. As an example, when I take it, I used to park my car in the same spot every morning at the office many years ago. And then one morning I noticed someone else started using the spot. And the emotions that I felt at the very first moment when I realized that that was no longer my spot, it hadn't been dedicated to me. But that's when I kind of got started into this change topic, and I realized that, hang on, it's about shifting my mindset and how I approach different circumstances that I might not perhaps have expected. So with this in mind, let's now take a look at how we go about managing change. So in our daily professional lives, when we face change, it's often in the form of picking up new behavioral skills in terms of solutions. For instance, we may be presented with a new software that we need to start using. But when we think about how we go about picking up on the new ways of working, it's very much like the phone and how that has evolved. We used to dial in a circular motion to get our line and our connection. Then we moved into having to actually press buttons, which wasn't actually so sort of self-evident for some of us. And then we moved into the smartphones, where we actually started talking about swiping. And I remember for myself, I actually had trouble trying to understand, how do I actually open a line? And then someone started talking about swiping to me, and then I realized. So as I gradually, and we all gradually saw the value in text messages, in video calls, having that video call in the palms of your hand, we started seeing the value. So we started seeing the benefit, and it didn't seem so difficult after a while to actually use these new tools and solutions. So having said that, we're starting to see that the need to understand why we want to change, what's the benefit, is very much a human disposition. So we need to actually understand why we need to change, what's the benefit, the value, unless, or alternatively, we find ourselves actually perhaps resisting the change. So when we think about it, for COVID, for smokers, the reasons are pretty clear. But when you think about it a bit further, hand washing, I took the picture here as an example. It was so self-evident for everyone before COVID, but aren't we now actually a bit more aware of why we're washing our hands and when we're washing our hands? So it was a lot about creating that awareness of why we need to wash our hands because of COVID. So it's creating that awareness of why we need to change. Now I'm repeating myself a few times here because this is some of the fundamentals of how to manage change, creating that awareness of why. There's a good article from HBR on good leadership, is about communicating change, or communicating why. So maybe you might want to take a look at that. So moving on from the why highlights the fact that actually we're talking about a choice, a personal decision. So we choose, after we've understood why or what the purpose is, we make that very sort of concrete choice that we decide to change our ways of working or our ways of thinking. So we decide to participate and support a change or not. And this is often the most difficult part of change. Now, you may have read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Another point to the difficulty in change is the fact that we have a brain that has a fast moving pace and a slow moving pace. Zoe Chance from Yale University, the link I have here at the bottom of the slide, also talks about the two brains that we have, gator brains and then the court brain, which is the slower, the thinking brain. Why I'm bringing this up, again, it all has to do with our personal decision making, how we actually come to the choice that we make. And in a work context, when we think about the work environment, leaders and managers actually have such a strong sort of grasp and influence and impact on the employees and their team members on making these decisions and making those choices to actually follow a new way of working or a new way of thinking. So we often talk about visible advocacy, sponsorship for a change. These are great drivers and supporters for a wider change in individuals.
Tuire, I have a question for you, a quick one, if it's okay.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Thinking about change as this kind of, let's say from my history at least, there was even change managers and people accompanying the organizations to communicate to people about change. And for a long time, I've been thinking that this is the wrong angle, in a sense, to advocate on change, because like you said, change is part of everyone's life on a continuous basis. Only do we in company make it an exceptional thing. So how do you feel about that in practice? That, you know, how do we, isn't the way we talk about change part of the problem as well?
I wouldn't perhaps say it's a problem, but it's possibly more of, like you say, it's a way of looking at it more from, it's always going to be an individual choice. Do we do something or not? So the change management practice in itself looks at the holistic sort of picture. It looks at both the organization's objectives, where it wants to go, but it also looks at the individual's position in that entirety. And that's what that change management practice is, in most cases, often about. And Galith, I love the fact that you brought that up, because that nicely leads me into my next slide, which is where I touch very briefly on the Prosai Framework. So the framework, you may notice that I talk about awareness creation, so understanding why we need to change. I talk about desire, meaning we bring in the need or the want or the choice, the decision to change. Those are the two building blocks of the Prosai change management framework. The next three blocks are creating knowledge, awareness, and ability. Sorry, not awareness, but knowledge and ability, and reinforcement being the last component, where you go back and you repeat a lot of the messages, a lot of the content, and the sort of communication that you have been working on before you reach the reinforcement stage. And I think this is where we often see that companies are actually focusing on just building knowledge, providing training, sending out communications, but taking the time to actually look at what does it mean for the individual. That's where you start getting a bit deeper into how do you actually get people to change. And you start understanding that the role of the person may play a huge part. So what it is that their own context is from a daily sort of life perspective, that plays a big role for an individual, whether they can and want to change or not. So follow the mass, as it were. So it's all about finding the value. The abbreviation here, what's in it for me, is something that we use a lot as well, is when you start understanding what's the value for yourself and or the individual that you're working with, then you start seeing that there's less of just succumbing to change, but then more about embracing the change, truly wanting to learn more. So Prosai, the change management framework, this is something that we could spend another session on. Maybe you're having a guest on who might be touching on that, but it's definitely something that goes deep and wide in companies today.
Definitely.
All right. So I'm going to move now on to the future of work. So we looked at the individual's perspective on change, but now let's look at the organization and how the future of work will change the way the organization interacts there. So taking a look at COVID, we know that it truly changed everything around us. I wanted to bring in a few statistics just because there are so many statistics, but what happened during the past 2 months or at the beginning of the year was that we started seeing digitalization taking a 2-month sprint in terms of just progress as opposed to the 5-year sort of time it would have taken at a pre-COVID pace. So taking a look at these figures, one day after the World Health Organization had declared COVID as a global pandemic, we were already at 560 million minutes per day of Teams usage. And then only 2 weeks later, that figure had risen to 2.3 billion minutes per day. I think that's astounding, honestly, when you think about what it means that happened in the background, what it meant for organizations to actually pick up and start communicating via these tools that we have available for us. Not everyone was as fortunate as organizations that were already in a state where they had the infrastructure. For instance, schools were the ones who were perhaps struggling the most when they had to adopt tools and ways of working all at once, something that they hadn't had to do before. But still in the organization context, I love this quote from the CEO of Osuuspankki, one of the bigger banks in Finland. He states that it was an epiphany for him to realize that they could build a robot in 2 weeks. And again, we're talking about something that would have taken maybe 6 months to 8 months to develop and roll out. But this time they had managed it in 2 weeks. It just sort of shows that an external force such as COVID can really change the nature of the game. But having said that, there are other accelerators for change, the way I see it. And I was talking about this as I was preparing for the presentation. I was talking about this with my colleague, Andrea Vogel, and she mentioned Gertrude. Now, you may recognize Gertrude as Elon Musk's pig with the computer chip in her brain. And this is, by the way, not Gertrude. This is just a picture of a pig. I didn't find a picture of Gertrude that I necessarily wanted to show. And the fact that now we already have something that's working in terms of having an interface, a working interface between brain and machine is, at least from the way I see it and how my colleague was saying it, she said that it's kind of mind-blowing, just the thought that how far we've come. And that made me think, how am I actually seeing this in my daily life? And I'm actually using a lot of AI in my work and I don't know it, I don't realize it. So Gertrude's example for me was one of the places where I noticed, oh, there's another thing that's pushing us forward, and it's just technology itself is taking leaps and bounds forward, regardless of COVID, really. And then I still wanted to highlight something that came across my eyes as I was looking into the research that we have. the process of adopting new behaviors hasn't changed. It's still moving at a human's pace. I found this quote from Dr. Michael Park quite insightful because it does put perspective on how we need to also address change in organizations in the work context. I'll share a few of the trends here that we've sort of surfaced or are surfacing at the moment. I'll go through these 6 trends very briefly here, but there are more for sure, but these are the ones that our research has surfaced. So we talk about talent and skills, and this is very much now about understanding what skills lie beneath the roles that we have. But it's also about building professional identities, not only outside the organization, but inside an organization. So internally, we become even more networked and we start having identities that we use or the organizations use as a way to match talent, skills, roles, and preferences. Then we talk about augmented environment. So this is where we see that tasks are becoming much more technology involved, meaning that technology starts completing tasks much more than they did before. And then when we talk about change agility, this is where we're also touching on emotional agility. So it's our ability to rapidly actually adapt to the changing environment as employees, as humans in the organization. We have a 4th trend here. It's about fluidity and adaptability. So how well we're able to adjust to the environment around us. But this is also a lot to do with the gig economy, the part-time work approaches that we see. So many organizations are working in, for instance, a gig economy approach, which means that the traditional mindset of having long-term employment contracts isn't necessarily something that we should even perhaps have as a baseline. The future looks very different in terms of the employee life cycles, as it were.
That's a really good point. I actually had a thought around that as well that I wanted to share, and also hear maybe Caroline your thought, that this gig economy, which is de facto kind of the ability to kind of, I guess, freelance for different companies at different time, it's also starting to sink into larger companies where people might no longer be interested to stay in the same department or mission for years and years at end. So there is really a, let's say, a need for hyperactive change also that are happening in large organizations. Would you, Caro, agree with that?
Yeah, I literally had the mouse button on the mute icon because I was going to bring the same point again. So I think you said it very well. But Tuire, I will let you finish with the 6th one, and then I would have a question for you on those ones as well. So.
Very good, very good. I'm mindful of the time, by the way, so I'm going to try and keep time as well.
No worries.
Yeah, so okay, thanks. So the 5th and the 6th, I think, go quite well hand in hand, but they're worth taking separately as well. So diversity and inclusion, in a sense, is no longer a separate pillar for organizations. For a company, it's very much a foundation if you think about how it operates. And this is also, when we think about mindsets, it's also about having an open culture in the organization. Do you feel comfortable working out loud? This is part of diversity and inclusion. And that ties into the purpose and the culture of the organization. So do employees actually have or sense that connection with a company's mission? Do they feel connected, and do they sense that the same purpose that they have for their own objectives are matched with the ones that the company portrays? That's also a big topic in terms of just the organizational culture as well.
When reflecting on your customers, which I think are mostly large accounts and based in Finland, which of these 6 do you think are the hardest for them to make the real change?
Well, to be honest, I mean, my customers know who they are, but I think in any company, honestly, at this day and age, one of the fundamental challenges is having the culture that actually supports the agility for this current environment. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. So all of these points are probably on the agenda, but if it isn't sort of in the culture, if it isn't in the ways of working when no one is there, do you see what I mean? If it's, I like the definition of culture is when no one's there. How do we work when no one's watching us? What's the way of working? Are we still diverse? Are we still inclusive? That I think is where it really kind of hits the nail on the head when we manage the culture.
Yeah, because otherwise it becomes a tick mark in a just a checklist, right? It's like, okay, we have a diversity and inclusion policy, check. We have a a culture manager, or check, and it doesn't really change fundamentally the way that people are working in that sense.
Yep, precisely.
Good.
All right, good. But that nicely wraps up on my second point, and now we come to the component that I felt I wanted to highlight, because this is something that really tells us how we manage at work. So it's our attention. And I'll show you what I mean through a very light demo. So this is how our attention works. We start working on a weekly report, and we're getting along nicely until the first distraction comes in, and that's an email, which we obviously need to check. We saw the alert. So we go back to our weekly reports. We have to pick up on the context where we were, and then we continue on the report right until the next distraction comes along. And we have the phone call. The conversation takes our mind to a different area, and we have to go back to the beginning of the weekly report to see where we were, where we wanted to go, and then we get our thoughts in order, and we're back in business. Right until the third distraction comes along, which is a chat message, and we obviously have to answer that chat message, and we go back to our weekly reports after a few moments of interruption, which means that we have to pick up on where we left off. And here you see, this is a very, very sort of simple demo, but I love it because it actually shows something that I recognize in myself. I don't multitask. I am actually task switching. And when we're in meetings, when we look at that email, we're not listening and watching at the same time. We're actually, our attention is in a different place.
Yeah, I have to say that when you sent me the presentation beforehand, I of course had the sneak peek, and I was looking at this slide, and I was like so much recognizing myself in this. I think probably 99% of our audience member today are recognizing themselves in it, but somehow having it on a slide just kind of makes it kind of connected in my brain. I was like, of course I know I'm doing this, but until I kind of saw it there. So I agree with you. I think this little demo is really great, because we know we do this, but just the way of, at least for me, having it in the face, having it in my face as a reminder was actually a really good point. And I've already sort of removed some of these Teams pop-ups, like for instance, when somebody joins, it's like, we're 67,000 people in the company. So if it pops up every time somebody joins, it's just really annoying.
Precisely.
So removing this kind of notifications and stuff when you have a specific task to do, like a weekly report, like you were showing in your example, I think is really, really important, because our attention span is not great. And I love this sentence that you just said, that we're not multitasking, we are task switching, which I think is a very good point.
And that's a good point also for women, because we pride ourselves in multitasking. It is scientifically proven it's not a thing. We can't really multitask, right. So let's stop bragging about that.
But still, we think we're very good at it.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. But I still wanted to pick on something, because obviously you work for Microsoft, and those are Microsoft tools. And I think it's really honest to show that slide. I think technology, we can, of course, as human, always be aware and try to control and manage. We need to also be conscious that the technologies are designed to pick on our attention, and we need to be deliberate about this. So I think it's actually pretty clever and cool of Microsoft to make such a demo, because in a sense it shows that this is how it's designed. Now be human, be smarter.
I think, Galith, you're quite right there that we need to own our own attention. We need to protect it. As I said in the previous slide, it's about protecting your attention. And maybe if I move on, why we want to protect our attention is that we want to promote flow, that state of total concentration. You're completely absorbed in what you're doing. That weekly report would have taken half the time had those interruptions not taken place. And we know from studies that when you're in a flow state, that's when you're at your most creative, because you're curious at that moment. You're thinking, you're asking questions, you're really focusing on the topic that you're working on. And that happened to me, by the way, when I was working on this presentation. I had a fantastic few hours and I was totally engrossed on the topic. I had so much fun on that. But why am I sharing this? It's because 77% of CEOs worry about not having enough creativity to reinvent the business they are in. So what they're pretty much saying is that they want employees to be creative. They want to ensure that employees can collaborate and embrace teamwork and come up with new ideas and tackle challenges without that sort of limitation. If they don't have the attention, they don't have the flow. So studies show us that organizations that are flexible to adapting change also sort of manifest the innovative business culture. So what this boils down to is that the key ingredient for an organization moving forward becomes creating a learning culture for innovation. This is where I come back to the earlier question about the trends, is that having all of this insight truly does underline the fact that it's not just the tick boxes that you can say that I have communicated that we're going to change and I've mentioned the roles and we are being diverse. No, it's very much about how are we actually, as an organization, embodying the culture of learning and innovation. A complicated way of saying what's in the box there. All right. That's it for that additional topic that I wanted to highlight, meaning let's protect and promote our attention and the flow states that we can find ourselves in. But now I wanted to share how Microsoft is and has sort of addressed change and the future of work. So in February 2014, Satya Nadella became the third CEO of Microsoft. And that's quite an accomplishment in the sense that we have only had 3 CEOs up until that point. It's a company of 4 decades, which means that on average, we would have had many more CEOs. And when he stepped into his role, Satya saw that in order for us to remain relevant in the current environment, we needed to change. We were infamous for our slowness, our sort of our thinking inside the bubble and the internal battles that we had. And it took Satya 9 months to look at where we were and where we needed to be. And what he recognized was that we have 3 strengths as a company. Microsoft has a strong spirit of giving. We have a desire to create technology for good. And we also have bold ambitions. That's what we are, a company of bold ambitions in a technology world. And that's where Satya built our new mission on. He based our mission to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more onto those 3 strengths that we have. And what this meant was that we as employees felt very connected to this mission. We saw the purpose, we saw the vision that Satya had and our leadership has, and it was easy for us to embrace this. However, what it meant from a practical point of view was that we needed to change. We needed to change from a group of know-it-alls to a group of learn-it-alls. So we had to start building this culture of learning inside Microsoft. And that meant that we had to embrace the growth mindset. So we started talking to each other. We began opening up and working as one Microsoft across teams, organized or subunits, rather than each unit and product group for themselves. And this is all based on partly on Professor Carol Dweck's book Mindset. So if you ever have a chance or have read it, it's worth taking another look at it, because it has such insightful sort of views on how the mind works, how we learn, how we adjust to change. It's all about also emotional agility for individuals. And a practical change that really happened in Microsoft, which was one of the bigger drivers as well for us, was how we were being measured. So we used to be on a forced curve, best team members, worst team members. Everyone had to find their place on those curves. But what we're being measured on now is our impact in 3 areas. We're being measured on how we contribute as an individual to the organization and our targets. And as a second point, how we contribute to others' success, meaning how do we actually work with those around us? How do we work out loud? And the third measure is how do we build on others' success? So how do we collaborate? And personally, I find that these 3 measures are perfect for me to actually take on the growth mindset. I'll be the first to admit that I was actually surprised as to how fixed my mindset was. But during these years with Microsoft, I'm seeing that it's a lot about how you sort of perceive things, how you approach things. That's where you get the most value out of what it is that you're doing. But while we've made great progress, it's definitely not the same company that it was in 2014. We're still on a learning journey, and we do find that there are still areas that we are working on.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I was going to ask actually that how far you were in the journey, but you partially answered that already. Were there like really strong pocket of resistance that eventually led to some people saying like, I don't want to be in that culture, I don't identify with this to be state, and eventually just left the company?
I can't say for sure if that has happened or hasn't happened, but I could imagine that perhaps the new culture just wasn't a fit for every single employee. And I do know that, for instance, other companies have actually stated that this is our new culture. We're going to thrive in this open culture. It's your choice if you want to stay or leave. So this is, these are ways of sort of hammering through the new context that we want to be in. That might be, but I mean, as said, I'm sure that, I mean, it's a huge company, so I'm sure there were people who were so happy with the way things were that they didn't see how they could continue.
But again, I think that from a communication point of view, at least I really like this slide. It's very effective. There is no room for interpretation. And I really love this, from know it all to learn it all. And I find it very effective in the sense that you can't possibly not understand this message that is written there. So there is no, I mean, repetition is important, and there's a huge change management that's needed when you do this kind of cultural change. But if you sort of like print that page and put that on everybody's desk in the company, they should have some sort of understanding very rapidly of where you're trying to go. And I think sometimes in these culture changes, we tend to use so big words and so complicated words, and let's be like this and like that, and this, that, and the other thing, and sometimes very basic messages are the ones that tend to resonate the most with people. So I think it's really quite interesting, and I guess that from the people that were used to this fixed mindset culture, to see that, hey, this is where we need to go now, of course doesn't happen overnight, but at least was kind of like setting the tone for what the ambition level was.
Yeah, indeed. I like the slide as well, and I sort of, when I look at the left side, those are the factors that are truly preventing us from becoming something else when one looks at the list. So you're quite right. Good. All right. One last slide on the topics. I wanted to share this skilling initiative, knowing that our audience today is International Working Women of Finland. This skilling initiative, which was announced this year, I feel is very true to our mission. So we're no longer looking internally at how we can be best. We're actually looking at how can we help others be best. And this is an initiative that Microsoft has announced where we're helping upskill or introduce skills for 25 million people to acquire the needed digital skills in the new economy. You see some of the roles listed here in the middle of the slide. More about this is on the new site of the Skills Initiative. And it's all about just having a path, a learning path for a different area which is of interest to you. I think this is great. I'm very, very proud to be part of this
That's
initiative.
damn impressive, I have to say, on my behalf. I can't believe the ambition level. It's been very visible on different platforms, and I actually buy it. Like, I do see that it's really happening. So I also feel for our audience that this is something to investigate, because the skills that are actually being advertised there, they're really like up to date, no outdated insight from there. Impressive.
Yeah. Good. Now I'm wishing I wouldn't have left one slide to the end. I'll still share it because it also has.
Don't worry. And by the way, we have a lot of really good questions as well.
Yes,
so please take your time. This is really important.
Right. Super. All right. Well, in any case, this was supposed to be my last slide on the topic in terms of just summing everything up for us, what I've gone through here today. I wanted to highlight that the way I see it, change is at a new scale. And it's not only because COVID came along, but it's also because there have been things coming along that are just accelerating at the moment, and it's all coming together now. The other thing I wanted to highlight was the importance of our attention. It's so crucial that we understand how sort of fragile our attention is and how we need to protect it, because that is the key to actually addressing what is really top of mind for CEOs. They want to remain relevant. They want their companies to be innovative so that they're on top of their game and able to manage the competition. And it's fierce. So that is the last takeaway that I wanted to sort of highlight here at the end. That leaves me with nothing further than saying thank you very much for letting me be the guinea pig of the series. I love it. Love jumping into these things.
You set the bar very high. I think that our next speakers, if they see your presentation, will be a bit intimidated. So it was really great to have you, and
thank you.
We've been having now a lot of questions coming up. So Galith, I'll let you take the lead on the question.
Yes, and again, I agreed with Caro that you really kind of gave a lot of insight, very complete, very future driven, which obviously was exactly the idea. So thanks again. I love that you're intimidating the next speaker. So greeting to whoever speaks after Tuire. We have plenty of amazing questions, and I can't resist. There is one that resonates with me very much. It was actually about the why, and it was Sapna's question. In the beginning, you talk about finding your why and kind of really going there before. And I think you led it very beautifully also to where you focus your attention and how you then deliver. The question was actually about, when you have found your why, how do you then sync it up with your management structure? As according to Sapna, and I think we've all observed in that sense similar thing, many companies are now very focused on short-term business profits. So feeling kind of rigid. So how do you deal with that in a few minutes, if you can, because we have even more?
That's a great question. Yeah, very shortly, the why needs to be tied to the bigger mission. It can't be what is it that we do today or in the next 4 weeks. The purpose of a person has to be a bit more long term. So when I talk about this with my stakeholders, I do try and sort of separate what happens in the daily work versus where do you find that sort of purpose to what you're doing in your daily work, and you link it to something a bit bigger.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think we have all worked, at least most of us have worked in those companies where you read the strategy, and the strategy is that we want to make more money. So that's hard to relate. I think there has been a lift in these purpose-driven companies these past few years. And definitely companies are also trying to find their why, and it's not a bad direction.
Exactly. And maybe Galith, still on that point,
Yes.
I love the fact that you brought up strategy, because that's something that's also changing. Strategies are no longer constant. They're not set for 10 years. Strategies can actually change very quickly. And I think COVID showed it. Our strategy for teams was perhaps slightly different, but everything changed in just a matter of days when we started reprioritizing everything, because we saw what was happening around us.
Absolutely. And thanks again for pointing it out. And I think it relates to your key trait to have, which is this kind of agility in how you deal with things. So good way to connect your findings. More question, at least related to change management, and maybe I will bundle a few questions if it's okay. When it comes to making change practically, how did you begin? Was it communication, education? And how do you feel, let's say, that that was the most impactful way to kind of make that change happen? And in a sense, if you could also bring it to what you feel are the most important skills to lead change and manage change.
Just so that I understand, is the question more about my own personal career or the work that I do with my customers?
It was Priyanka's question. I feel this was about your personal career, but Priyanka, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah, I think I was asking more about the, you showed there was a mindset change from fixed mindset to growth mindset. So my question was like, how do you start doing that practically? Like, what are the steps?
Okay. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think on an individual level, you do need that sort of, how should I call it, a trigger from the outside, unless you realize it from, as a person that, oh, I actually portray fixed mindset behaviors. I think the sort of the trigger may at best come from the outside, meaning it could be an assessment that you do as a team, or the sponsorship within the company. An advocate shows you that, hey, this is what we want to do. Are you doing these things? And then you start sort of becoming more aware of what it is and what it isn't that you're sort of thinking about. Not sure if that answered your question, Priyanka.
Yeah, it did. Thank you. I think Galith also added something like the skills. What do you need? The skills.
That was, I think, the last one. But Carol, would you like to take more questions?
Yeah, I think we have one more from Katarina. Concerning the change in this sense perhaps came from the top of the organization, so from the CEO, and it's of course challenging then to make this implementation across like all the branches and departments. And I think you answered this already partially, but what was maybe the sort of ways that it was spread so far out? And also Katarina is asking that if you have the sort of, or was it another one now, sorry? Yes, no, sorry, there was also another question from Sama around the sort of like also bottom-up change management and how to approach that. So
I love that question, or that point about bottom-up, because change happens in many forms. And it's, while for instance at Microsoft it looks very much like we have had an advocate, a very visible advocate in Satya. He took the ownership and the sponsorship of the change. He kept driving. He built that sort of framework for us to start working. Everything started changing. As I explained, the HR changes that we had in terms of how we're measured, the way we work, how we're situated, just the way teams are distributed in units. All of these things built towards, and they help towards the overall change that we're experiencing. And yes, communications played a huge role. The fact that we're learning on sort of during our workday, that's another key factor. We have immense hours of learning that our roles are sort of tagged to do, but it's not only technical skill roles or skills that we're learning, but it's also behavior, it's business skills that we're also learning. So there's a lot of content that's being sort of provided to us in a way that it's part of our work, part of our daily lives, And it all feeds into the gradual journey of changing ourselves. So definitely not a switch that you can turn on. And I think in many cases, when you think about the bottom up, that's needed. You need the top down, that's also needed, but you also need the advocates in the middle. So we often talk about the middle management being the gray layer. And even though you might have a great sponsor at the top and you have a young team which is eager to take on the new ideas and ways of working, there might be that gray matter in the middle, which actually might prove to be the sort of the bottleneck for all of the change. So again, change comes in many forms.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Good.
Excellent. So
Great.
Any more questions, or are we done with the questions? I think we're good.
I think we're good with the questions, though I have to say that Zoom is still a bit difficult for me, these group chats, because there's a lot of text in a very small space. So I hope we didn't miss anyone. And then let's move on to the management, the recruitment corner, sorry. So perhaps you have some resources that you want to share with our audience.
Well, yeah, I'm sharing the last slide that I had. So in addition to the skilling initiative that we have, we also have a tech learning series for women, which I recommend you take a look at, as well as then just insights on life at Microsoft. There are some EMEA region events that might be of interest to you as well, to take a look at what sort of careers there are and what a day can be with Microsoft.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. If that is okay, I will quickly share one last thing, then one last information for today. Let me try to do that again. Share the screen. Please let me know when you can see.
And we will share also the presentation to the audience, right?
Yes, and the recording.
Yes. So promote to your friends who couldn't join online. You get the VIP access.
Yes, exactly. And yes, so again, this is fantastic. It was the first event, and again, first episode, sorry, and thank you so much, Tuire, for joining us and doing such a great job. Very informative session, very high quality, so that's great. And next up, I will put the event probably tomorrow or day after tomorrow in the Facebook group. We are going to talk diversity and inclusion with Kaya, who is the head of talent and culture at KONE. And well, I work also for KONE, and I'm one example of the diversity and international talents in that sense. So I will be also sharing like my own experience during that episode. My co-host will be Priyanka, who is also part of our IWWOF organization as the entrepreneurship track leader and the CEO also of Business With. So we're very excited about this. It's going to be on 13th of October and it will be recorded as well. So if you can't make it, don't worry. And okay, we think that this whole series is great, but we want to hear from you guys. So this was the first one. Let us know what you thought. You can write directly in the event, or you can write to me, Caroline, directly in MP or Galith if you wish to share your feedback. It would be really, really good to hear what you thought of the format, and also maybe what are your aspirations for future content and things like this. We've got a great lineup of companies like Elisa, like Neste, etc. that we are now preparing the sessions with, and there's lots of great content coming up. But if you also want to represent your company, perhaps in one of these episodes, then also let us know. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed the contents that were shared today, and we will hopefully see you then again on the 13th of October.